Okay. Hi, Darrell. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Doing fine, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I
It's a
appreciate
pleasure.
it. So, I'm looking at your bio. It says you were born in Simi Valley, California. Where is that?
That's just north of Los Angeles County, so it's right outside of LA. It was a small town then, but it's grown quite a bit since then.
Okay, so I've been there to California a couple of times, but my geography is not so good. So, if I take Interstate 5 and head north, would I go through Simi Valley?
No, you would go into the San Fernando Valley, maybe the 101 or whatever, cross to the north side of the valley, and there's the 118, and that goes into Simi Valley.
All right, so it's like, what are you, about an hour or two out of LA?
Depending on the traffic.
Depending on the traffic,
Yes,
yes.
right.
Okay. All right. It also says on your bio that you attended 12 different schools.
That's right.
How did you
From
manage
12th grade
that?
to first grade to 12th grade.
From the first grade to the 12th grade, so every year you changed schools?
Just about between public and private schools, switching back and forth between that, and then also moving. We moved a bit until I eventually we went overseas and graduated in Cyprus.
Aside from the moving, which I can understand, what was wrong with the other schools that didn't work out for you?
It wasn't an issue with the schools at all. It was just possibly the location. And when my mom could afford to put my brother and I into private school, she did. And then there was other issues back and forth. The parents were divorced when I was 10, and so we moved then too. So all put together, very it's a varied experience.
How did that experience affect you later in life? Did you find yourself unable to stick to one thing?
No, I don't know if it was so much that it would be learning how to make friends fast, but I would then struggle later with having longer term friendships but there were some friendships that even the distance didn't make a difference. So we kept up some close friends. But yeah, you had to learn how to make friends quickly, learn how to fit into groups and things like that. So it was a good experience overall, I think.
It said that you moved to Cyprus.
Yes,
How long did you live there?
only 6 months. That was just the last semester of my senior year. My dad was working in Saudi Arabia at the time. He was working for a defense contractor. And so the Saudi government didn't want any American high schoolers in Saudi Arabia, go figure. So they kept all us rowdy kids out. So I went to boarding school in Cyprus. And a lot of the kids in the boarding school there had their parents working somewhere in the Gulf states. Most of the kids, that was their story. And so my dad was there in Saudi Arabia for 5 years to install the system, and then he came back to the States. By that time, I was in college.
So he had to go there alone,
No, well, his company went. His company
but I
went
mean,
with
he
us.
couldn't bring his family.
Correct. Now, he wasn't married at the time because my mom had passed away the year before, but he, I mean, if he was married, he could have brought his wife, but not the kids, not adult age or teenage kids.
Well, that's a strange one. Okay. I mean, I kind of understand why they don't want us there, but it seems kind of cruel to break families up simply for the employment.
Well, I did go to visit him a few times out there. So, and man, there's some stories that come out of that. That was a very interesting experience. I mean, that was in the 80s, and the Saudi government getting the oil, basically hitting oil in the 50s, had all this money. They didn't know what to do with all this money. I mean, in like 15 minutes, they could have bought all the 7-Elevens if they wanted to, all this money pouring in. And so the very, very low population. And so they were giving things away to their citizens, like pickup trucks. You had Bedouins that didn't know how to drive, get a pickup truck. And so people there, at least at that time, and I'm not trying to badmouth anybody, but at least at that time, driving was adventurous.
Yeah, it's always better if you take a driving lesson first before you get a vehicle. And I think that a lot of countries, people just get a vehicle. I mean, I lived in Thailand for 3 years when back in 2007 I was teaching English, and I swear these people, they never took a driving lesson. And they, had enough money to put a down payment and get a car, and they figured it out as they went along.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the story there too. And there wasn't any infrastructure there for supporting vehicles either. Like, you don't have auto mechanics, you don't have body repair shops, and why fix your car if the government's going to give you another one anyway? So you would have these vehicles off to the side of the road in the middle of the desert, just sitting there, resting and rotting, and who knows what would happen.
Interesting, very interesting. So at some point, you started writing. When did you start to write?
High school.
In high school, okay.
Right.
And did you continue on with that throughout your life at this point, or did you kind of put it aside and do something else?
Well, it sounds like you talked to other authors, because
yeah,
that was kind of, and I know you have, that was kind of the situation. It was put on hold. I mean, life happens, and it's a hobby that you get to when you can. And so, but at the same time, I was able to piece together this world then that can spawn these different stories. And so that's one of the key elements of being writing in science fiction, fantasy, or horror. You can create this world then that these stories come out of. And having this extra time during that allowed me the chance to let that percolate and develop.
Well, the book cover that we have is called The Healing Stone. Is this a one-off or is it a series?
It's the first of a series.
Do you have more books out in this series, or is this the start
This is the start, and this is there are other short stories that are out currently, but this is the first novel.
Okay. Where did this story come from? Tell us a little about the origin of the story.
I think when I was a kid, growing up watching, I always had a science fascination with science fiction and history as well. And so a lot of the science fiction shows, whether Star Trek, Star Wars, old Doctor Who's, this is like late 70s, early 80s, those stories really sat with me, and then they percolated or they developed over time and say, man, if I were to write an episode, I would do this. And then that started to solidify more and more into this other world that brings these elements in and others, and also asking questions like, what if time travelers from the future lose their tools in the past? What kind of impact would that have? How would that change things? What would people back in our past think about that? So then that took elements of my interest in history and put that together. And this first novel has to do with a teenage orphan who inherits a stone that can heal anything, and how he treats that and what happens. And eventually the people who originally created the stone, they come looking for him.
The stone can heal anything. Is that, when you said that little scene in Narnia came up in my head where the girl has those little red liquid. Have you seen the first Narnia?
Yes, and I've read the stories too. I'm familiar with C.S. Lewis. In fact, I just got done reading another one of his books. But yeah, I think it was Lucy.
Lucy, right? The little girl.
Yep.
She was given by the Santa Claus. She was given this little red liquid, and she could put a drop in someone's mouth, and they'd come back to life from the dead, or be cured of whatever ails them.
Right.
At that point. Okay, so is that what your healing stone does?
Yes, except it doesn't bring people back from the dead.
Okay.
And Francisco, who's the main character, it's been in his family for generations. And it's actually caused a lot of problems because you had people that wanted to use it to make money, and then people wanting to steal it, and all sorts of issues come across like that. His father tells him that he can do no harm lest he break the charm. In other words, if he hurts someone, the stone won't work. So Francisco's this beefy kid. He ends up on the streets. His father's been killed. Both his parents have been killed. and he's trying to make ends meet. He's getting beat up, but he's not fighting back because he believes that the stone will break. Meanwhile, the stone does heal him, sort of like a Wolverine type of thing.
The stone has a moral clause built into it?
Yes.
Well, that's interesting. Okay. And where does this stone come from? Does he just discover it?
His fifth great grandfather Juan de Hortigaya finds it. He basically unearths it. It was in this crate, and that was on one of the short stories, Child of the Stone. And so his great great grandfather finds it, and then it's been in Francisco's family through the generations. But he finds out in this story that it's not exactly what he thinks. When the people who were the original owners of the stone find him, there's a much bigger story behind it.
You've got a couple of interesting questions here. I think we've got time for maybe one or two. You've already talked about the time travelers losing their tools. That's actually been discussed in a lot of time travel movies and shows where they say that you cannot go back in time and alter the course of history because it would have a profound impact on the future or the present. Like you can't go back in time and kill Hitler,
right?
Or you can't, or keep people from developing atomic weapons or whatever it is. And is that what you mean by losing their tools? Like they bring technology that doesn't exist to people in a certain period of time, yeah?
Correct. And it wouldn't be too much of a spoiler, so think a little bit further about how that relates to possibly a stone that heals anything. But I'm not going to say any more about that. But concerning time travel and the theories of time travel, basically, I think you can boil most of those theories down to three. One is that time is immutable, that you can't change it, or events are immutable. If you go back, you're not going to be able to affect anything. And that story goes back as far as like Oedipus Rex. You're familiar with that story?
A long time ago, yeah.
Yeah. So this was Greek mythology about a king who was prophesied that he was going to kill his mother and kill his father and sleep with his mother, and so he does whatever he can to avoid that, and he ends up actually doing that. So in that regard, time is immutable, or events are immutable. Then there's the grandfather paradox. You go back, you kill your grandfather. If you killed your grandfather, you never would have been born. If you were never born, your grandfather would have lived, and then you would have been born. So then you got this causality loop. That's another way to look at it. Third way to look at it is every time somebody goes back and makes a change, they split off another universe, an entirely different universe, and that's a multiverse concept, and that's been used a lot in science fiction also.
Well, there is this idea that there are parallel universes, that there are an infinite number of possibilities. I think they even touched on that in Men in Black, where they had that character Griffin. Did you see that movie? It was the third?
Yes.
Okay. And Griffin was able to see multiple happenings at the same time.
Yeah, he was an interesting character.
He was a real interesting character. I liked that character.
Yeah.
So there is that idea that it could be this possibility or this possibility or this possibility, depending, but he didn't know which one was going to happen.
Right.
That was his torment, is that he saw all of them happening at the same time, but he didn't know which one was actually going to happen.
You imagine what that would do to your mind if you could actually see all these possibilities?
He would have been a psycho. I mean,
yeah.
And he was pretty well-grounded considering.
Yeah.
Because I remember at one point, Will Smith's character said something like, wow, that must be incredible. And he said, it's a giant pain in the ass. And I would agree with him. I think that would be about right, yeah?
Yeah, there's something called the Oxalate in the story, and in fact, the entire series, that is a computer that uses that type of forecasting to predict the future. But it can't say with finality that something's going to happen. So it predicts it in poetic form. So you kind of have to figure out what the meaning is. And there's two characters in this story that are looking Francisco based on this Oxalate prediction. and half of their task is to figure out who this person is.
Okay.
So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, that's interesting. Darrell, we are out of time. Just like that, we have to wind this down. Is your book out?
It's coming out July 11th.
July 11th. Okay. And last question, do you have a website that you want to give out?
Sure. It's darrellnewton.com, DARRELLNEWTON. There's I think 7 different ways to spell Darrell or something. So this is the only one that's going to get you there, though.
Well, 1 R, 2 L's, 2 R's, 1 L.
2 R's, 2 L's.
2 R's, 2 L's.
Yeah, but I mean, you could throw a Y in there too. That's how
some
people.
Well, like Darrell Hannah.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Well, Darrell, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was nice talking to you. Best of luck with your book. You don't know how many books are going to be in this series at this point, do you?
Yes. Well,
oh, you do.
Well, that might change over time, but right now there are 11 that are all planned.
11. Wow. Okay.
Yes.
And you've got all those ideas in your head currently?
Yes. Yep.
Unbelievable. All right. Well, thank you again. Nice meeting you.